Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Fly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Telegram, all of which are in the description box below. In addition to supporting me on Locals, you can also support me on Buy Me a Coffee and Subscribestar. Now, last week, I think it was either Wednesday or Thursday, I was on a cigar stream 158 with Academic Agent and Red Hawk to talk about, so the things that I had and originally planned to talk about were one, we already agreed that the red pill was broadly correct on how the system is rigged against men. I didn't want to have to go over that again because I already conceded the point. And then look at the TradCon position that marriage is a good social good that ought to be preserved, which I agree with as well. But the problem with the TradCon position is they're completely tone deaf when it comes to the actual facts on the ground. What they're saying might have been true in the 50s, if it was even true then, but it's not true now. And the third point was, then what do we do? Right now, what do we do could be framed as what do we do if we're traditionalists, or what do we do regardless? Because, spinning your wheels isn't a solution in light of what's coming. For a lot of reasons, I wasn't really able to get any much beyond there. There was a lot of time spent on talking about how the system is rigged against men. I'm like, okay, I already accepted that. I was hoping to have avoided that. And things got a little crazy with Sargon. So and a lot of people were wondering, like, well, what was I trying to get at? What did I want to get at? So broadly speaking, and we'll get into this in a little bit more detail as we continue the episode, I wanted to get into three things. One, technology changes everything. Two, the need for off-the-grid parallel institutions. And then three, changes in behavior of men and women in order to accomplish one and two. So that's sort of my brief intro at this point. Logos, what do you have?
Yeah, so I watched the stream live. I was doing something, I don't remember what, and Todd was like, yo, man, I'm talking to Sargon. And I'm like, wait, hypothetically or no? You're like, no, right now. I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. And so I hopped on, and there they were, Todd talking to Sargon. And in the beginning, it sounded pretty good, because I jumped in around the part where he was talking about the conservative position being taken care of, basically the tribe, children, women, whoever needs it, like the tribe looking out for itself, talking about like Greek mythology and stuff like that. And like, this is like conversations me and Todd have had. This sounds kind of based, but then like within 5 minutes of that, it became apparent to me that things had gone off the rails completely. When I analyze the stuff that Todd's going to analyze, I think the three things that I want to look at this from in terms of perspective would be this. And I think if Academic Agent would have done this with his stream, things would have been a little bit more clean. So the first thing is, are these problems the dating market being brought up? Are they problems that are going to take society down as a whole? Are they like social contagion problems that are just like, catastrophic? If you guys can't even agree on how terrible the scale of the problems are, of course you're going to talk past each other, right? If this is just a little tiff a generation's going through, a little bit of growing pains, you'll get over it, then the way Sargon and Agent were kind of talking their, relationship advice for young men seems rational in their view. We're going through a little blurb with technology. Here's young men can get past it. Fine. Okay, so that's question one. I think that Todd and myself and other people that were frustrated by the conversation thinks that the problems that we're seeing are endemic, will persist through generations, maybe even get worse, and are the kinds of things that can destroy a society. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing would be, if there is a big, broad social problem, the next question is, who can you save? Because one thing that kept coming up in the stream over and over and over again was, you have to save yourselves, basically. Well, the question is, what will saving yourselves accomplish? So one visual you could have for this is like you're getting sucked underwater. You finally manage to pull yourself up and swim up and grab a lifeboat. You get on the lifeboat, you look, and you're heading for a whirlpool, and everything's going to get sucked down under anyway, despite your best intentions, right? So if saving yourself is ultimately fruitless because this thing is going to just destroy civilization, then the you can only save yourself thing isn't good enough. It's counterproductive. It's not gonna work. So if it's possible, we can save more than just ourselves, and doing it would be beneficial for civilization, then the scope of the conversation needs to change. The narrative can't just be around just a bunch of individual young men getting advice from Papa Sargon to save themselves in the dating market, right? It's bigger than that. And the final question basically is, no, actually there's only two. Okay. I thought there was three for a second, but I don't think there was. Okay. So those are the two big questions. And until you get those things settled, nobody's going to be having the same conversation, because when I tune to this stream looking at, the trad question, marriage and sexuality or whatever, right? I'm thinking this is going to be talk about political theory. This is going to be talk about social systems, its consequences, demographics, things like that. And then soon after Sargon showed up, it was very much not about that. It was like, how important is sentimentality and how do men date women and things like this. It was just like individualized and not the direction I thought the stream was going to go. And failing to look at those two layers before you even engage in the conversation, I think is just going to be a big part of that. So.
Right. So let's start by, and you made the key observation of, are we starting from the same point? The other thing that one could expect, and I expected, was emphasis on the sort of contradictions in the trad composition. Logos, you and I was a year or two ago, went through the abolition of man, and at the end of the first chapter of the book, Lewis talks about, don't demand the gelding procreate, right? Because odd implies can. You have to have the capacity and the means to do so. And on the one hand, there's this expectation that, like the boomer narrative, you can just work your way to success and then start a family. Well, that's just not true anymore. And if you're coming from that position as a TradCon, you're just not going to ever get what you want out of the situation. So I was hoping to see, discussion about, reality check for the TradCons. That never happened. And so I think what this ties into the first point that I wanted to make about technology, because one of the things that you see with the dissident right in general, right? It's biology, right? They talk about biological differences between ethnic groups, biological differences between men and women. But all of a sudden, though, when it comes to the modern era, when it comes to the sexes, biology goes away. Because what I was trying to bring up was that there are certain obvious handicaps that female biology has that, absent technology, they couldn't do certain things. And so this idea, so they'll say that, well, this is biological. Women are always like X, or men are always like X. Well, here's the thing, right? Let's say you have an ape in the zoo, right? One of the things we've noticed is that when an ape is in a zoo in a cage, they spend a lot of time, perpetuating the solitary vice, because what else are they going to do? Now, you might say that's natural, that's ape behavior, but only an ignoramus would not realize the fact that the ape is in a cage. And that's not at all relevant in describing ape behavior. Furthermore, as we know now with reflections on the theory of science, by observing something, you're also affecting it. So even if you observe an ape in the wilderness, the ape knows you're watching, that's also going to change their behavior. So there's these two layers here that affect the behavior of what is being observed. But I think it's more important to focus on the prison, the cage. And so, we're the ape in the cage. We're in this gilded prison of modernity. And so we're acting in unnatural ways. And to say that, to extrapolate from that, that's somehow natural behavior for men and women, that in the state of nature, no, the state of nature is the Maasai tribesmen of Africa. That's how humans act, absent all of these strictures and impositions. And it's nothing like what we see in modern America or Europe. And so the question is, okay. And then second of all, it's the fallacy of the hasty generalization. You're looking at the last 100, 200 years of Western civilization, which is radically diametrically opposed to everything that came before it based on technological development. So none of that is relevant in determining what is normative male and female behavior. And so there's a kind of like Mott and Bailey going on where they're like, on the one hand, they will admit the radical division. Oh, it's radically different now. We have technology, we have dating apps, we have all of this. But then they'll say, no, it's always been this way. It's just the same old. Well, it can't be same old, because, 1,000 years ago in the Middle Ages, you didn't have any of this stuff. Men and women had to relate to each other differently. And so the influence of technology is schizophrenic. The people don't have a consistent way of accounting for it. If they want to go doom or black pill, they'll admit that technology changes a lot. But then there'll be this like subtle shift in the modern Bailey where it's like, no, things are more or less as they've always been, which they can't be if they already admit technology has changed things so much. And so the first thing I want to say is, how has technology changed all this? Well, first of all, unless you were extremely wealthy 200 years ago, it was more or less impossible for a woman to just wait around to her late 30s or 40s and not settle down and start a family. It's not possible because she's going to menstruate. She's going to want to, she's going to lactate. It's just not going to happen. Again, unless you're very wealthy and you can just sort of. So this is a function of wealth, which is a function of technology. And so all of that behavior is radically different. The idea of what the red pill calls the clock, right? Well, women had that in their late teens. And you can see this in the literature written even in the 19th century by women. Okay. You can look at Lucy Maud Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables. You can look at Pride and Prejudice. You can look at Little Women. All of these female authors are like, no, there's a clock and it's coming. And they all knew it when they were in their teens. The idea that you can put it off for 20 years is completely the result of technology. Furthermore, the material economic needs for a husband is diluted because women can enter the workforce as a result of the technological changes of the tampon and birth control. So the fact that they are no longer dependent on men and therefore can postpone marriage more or less indefinitely is, again, completely the result of technology. These two factors go away if we have, the collapse, in which case it's a whole different ballgame. So there's a lot to work on right there. But Logos, what do you want to say about technology and how it changes everything?
I think I'm just going to default to the previous two layers of analysis if we're asking the trad questions in terms of political philosophy. The first one is, has the degree to which technology altered the dating market, marriage, sex, and all those other relationships? A, is it going to reverse itself? B, is it detrimental to society as a whole, or is it just like a little social growing pain we're going through? And then after that question, we got to ask, okay, if it is maximally detrimental to society, if this is an endemic problem, then the question is, who can we meaningfully save? Can we just be a bunch of individuals making a life raft saving ourselves, and that's good enough? Can we save more? Ought we save more? I think that's what we should do first to finish analyzing this first part of the conversation.
All right. Well, that's great. So given the nature of the discussion, we're going to assume that this is bad, right? Because everybody concerned admits this is bad. This is not like some techno-progressivist who thinks that, we're going to have a post-family, Brave New World society. So given the nature in which this discourse was happening, we admit that it's bad. Now, is it passing? Well, we know it's not passing, right? Because each generation, one, people marry later and fewer people marry. So it's a twofold reduction, right? You marry older, which is bad for fertility rates for the woman, and then they marry fewer, right? So now fewer millennials married than Zoomers than Xers and Boomers, and then fewer Zoomers are probably, unless things change dramatically, and they could. Yeah, if current trends hold, fewer Zoomers will marry than millennials, and so this is not a passing fad. This is something that is going to persist if current trends hold. So then the second thing is, given your analysis, Logos, is can you do it alone? Well, the answer is no, because this is the other thing that I wanted to bring up: historical norms. This idea that you can have a nuclear family completely hermetically sealed and isolated from other communities is a fantasy. It was only the result of the post-World War II boom in the United States. We did briefly touch on this in the stream. There's a whole economy that doesn't exist anymore, which was primarily of women, which was for the caring for children, making their clothes, feeding them, of course, having them, helping other women have them, and then educating them. If you read older literature, you're going to find the midwife, you're going to find the wet nurse, you're going to find that's all gone. And so if your goal, now again, maybe you don't want to go back to the traditional family, right? A lot of manosphere types don't. Okay, well, we're not really including them here. If you're a TradCon or just somebody who thinks it's a good thing, then no, you can't do it alone. You have to restore this social unit with enough people to make it internally self-sustaining. And then the other thing is, let's say you're a manosphere that you don't want to go back to that because you still view that as gynocentric. Well, you still can't survive alone either, because no man is an island. As Aristotle said, only animals or gods can live alone. And the thing is, you're still going to need other people to cooperate with you to survive. And the question is, what is the best kind of system to do that? Well, it's becoming readily apparent that individual self-interest is not the best way to achieve that.
Right. So yeah, and this is where I think the stream should have gone. This is pretty bad. I mean, aside from just basic technological problems, you have economic problems also exacerbated by technology that are also putting strains on relationships and so on. Um, it's not just technology that's keeping people that's getting people to marry later. It's also the education problem. As the workforce gets so inflated, as communication technology gets better, employers can basically pit more and more workers against each other because we can, travel further, communicate further, and so forth. Um, that puts a downward pressure on labor, such that they have to meet more barriers to entry to compete in labor markets that people in the 60s used to be able to just do right out of high school. And as that trend continues, so I guess that this is exacerbated by technology, namely communication and travel technologies. But as those barriers to entry increase, you get degree inflation, right? Because everybody's got a high school degree. I'm not looking at like 20 job candidates in my local community anymore. I'm looking at 200 regionally, or 2,000 in the state, or 20,000 in the country, or 200,000 globally, right? If you're a corporation, looking at 200,000 job applicants all over the world for a single position, um, a high school degree is now a bare minimum that's just not going to cut it. And so now you have to start, excluding. Well, what about a bachelor's degree? Well, suddenly, if we say only people with a bachelor's degree can apply for this job, that 200,000 is going to get cut down to, like, I don't know, 80 or 120, let's say, back in the 60s, because bachelor's degrees were relatively rare. Okay, what happens now? If 200,000 people just get cut out of their job market because they no longer have a high school, they have a high school degree and no bachelor's degree, they're like, well, we're hosed. We can't get back in the job market and get the jobs we could have gotten until we get this bachelor's degree. And so now, instead of making it so you've now permanently solved your problems, you're now looking at 120. All you've done is kick the can down the road a decade or so, because more people get bachelor's degrees and you do the same job a decade later. And let's suppose it's not 200,000, but still like 80,000 people now have bachelor's degrees applying for your job. Well, now you have to exclude again just to make your application process more meaningful, given the number of applicants you can get all over the world. And this continues on and on and on and on. So you have that on one hand, and then you have the men and women entering the workplace like 60s and 70s. It's like a double whammy, because now men and women feel like they need to pursue higher and higher and higher education just to have a shot at decent quality of life jobs. That's going to be one of the main things that puts off marriage, because I'll tell you what, if you're going to school, if you're working and going to school, you're just not going to have the time, energy, or anything for raising children, taking care of your own home life. It's not going to happen, and so you have to put this out after you graduate school. Well, okay, if it's just a bachelor's degree, let's say like 6 to 7 years after high school, if you're a non-traditional student that's working part-time and going to school like I did, that's not so bad. But what happens a decade or two later when it's a master's degree needed? When you're looking at 10, 11 years out of high school, now you're looking at late 20s before you can even think about entering the labor force. But then you have the other problem where here's an interesting economic problem. It's the idea of rational expectations. Now, I think people go too far with this. I think this is like Robert Lucas's idea, where people go too far with this, and they assume that the consumer is more omniscient than they are, or whatever. But if the last several decades we expect degree inflation, what's going to happen? People are then going to try to get ahead of the curve and try to get ahead of where they think degree inflation is going. So it's not just going to be a master's degree after a bachelor's degree. People are now getting master's degrees and graduate certificates, or going straight into PhDs or something, just because they know where degree inflation is going, and they have to plan their school graduation 6-10 years in advance if they're, say, part-time. And so they probably have to do a lot more than they even plan on doing. That's really going to put off marriage. So this is one way that technology is exacerbating this problem to a degree that's not reversible, I think. I'm agreeing with your prognosis on this one. And who is going to be hurt by this? Well, like you pointed out, marriage rates, child rates, fertility rates, all this are going to drop off a cliff. And once those drop off a cliff, it's like, okay, well, I got mine. Screw you guys. I got a wife. I got a kids. I got, whatever. Well, we all share a country, it turns out. And if you're not bringing more children in, you're going to have an economy of the elderly with nobody to take care of them. First off, you're going to be very susceptible to foreign invasion. Second off, because you're not going to have a bunch of young people to join the military and keep your country safe. There's all sorts of things that are no longer just going to affect you. And so, like, I'm just flabbergasted. I don't see where this mindset of AA, Sargon, and other people come from, where it's just like, well, we're just going to save as many people as you can, and here's how you pick up ladies, and we're going to let society do what it's going to do. Society is going to go down a whirlpool and kill us all. Like, I was watching this documentary about Sparta, of all things, last night. I just saw it on my YouTube recommendations. I'm like, sweet, let's just watch this thing about Sparta. Sparta fell, according to this documentary thing, because the people in charge got so greedy, they kept trying to get more and more and more through the empire. And there ended up being a lot of like divisions of wealth, because as more gold entered the economy that the lower classes didn't get their hands on, you needed more gold to interact with the economy, or more resources or whatever, to the point where poor people couldn't even like get children armor to send them to training to become soldiers in the Spartan army. And so there's just like a natural cause of that. So the Spartans ended up not having a bunch of Spartan soldiers. They had to use like foreign soldiers that weren't as good. It was a whole thing. Something like that is probably going to end up happening to us. I mean, every stage is a little bit different, but by analogy, it's going to be very, very similar. So I don't understand this mindset where people can think of themselves as islands that are just going to like navigate this problem. It's going to be fine.
It's called individualism.
Yeah. I'm not an individualist. I look at the big picture, as I think you were. Mm-hmm. And it just looked like you were trying to communicate big picture ideas of how we're all screwed if nothing changes, to a bunch of individualists that were just like, well, no, let's just teach a few young men how to navigate this problem.
Well, a lot of it too is the idea that the system isn't rigged. It's that libertarian lie that if you just work hard enough, you'll be the next Bezos, you'll be the next Elon Musk, despite the fact that no, they were born for that position. This is an aristocracy. No amount of hard work will ever get you from like the working class to Elon. That's not going to happen.
I mean, it can, but it's really, really hard, because there might be like a MySpace Tom or somebody here or there that was, did not come from which family and kind of like made it. But here's the thing, right? They're going to point to individual examples of this, like very, very few individual examples in a country of like, what, 300 to 400 million people. They're going to be the exceptions that prove the rule. So it's like, you can do this, but you're pointing to exceptions that kind of like facilitate the rule that most people just aren't.
Right. So before we move to the next point, I think what I'll say, and I will see if you agree with this. With our last Moldbug stream, you said rather than a hierarchy, you'd want to have a feedback loop with these different things interfacing with each other.
Yes.
So what I would say is this problem of the sexual marketplace is a complex interrelationship of technological changes, economic changes, legal changes, and then social expectations. And they're all feeding into each other. Now, I focus on technology because I think that's the most fundamental change, driving all the others. But it's not acting alone. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree with Veblen on this one, where our views of science, morality, social systems, all of it changes based on what we can kind of take for granted by technology.
Okay. So the second point, I think we made it because this follows right on what you said. We need off the grid parallel institutions. Okay. So 2020 was very instructive, right? There were a lot of people that have been saying this for years, but we saw it in real time. All of the mandates for COVID, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you think about them, all the mandates, the majority of people went along with because it was economic pressure. You work for the government, you work for a corporation, you don't go along with the mandates, you get fired. And guess what? People went along with the mandates. Now, a lot of people had FU money and they could just opt out. But for those that didn't have FU money, they just went along. And so we have this strange thing, right? You go back 1,000 years. Local communities had very strict control over their members. And the difficulty was the central government didn't have a lot of control over those areas. There's an old saying, the king's writ does not read here. Whereas now it's the opposite. Local communities have almost no control over their members, and transnational corporations and the government seem to control everything. Now, part of that's a function of technology, but that leads to, so the only pressures then dictating behavior are these top-down pressures that are either transnational or national, which are often not in the interest of those communities that are being adversely affected by them, which means that we need to create new institutions. The other problem is all economics is in some sense dependency. But if you have, say, a command economy like in the Soviet Union or the American system now with mega corporations, it's all top down. And so the person at the top can exert all the power on everybody on the bottom to do what they want economically. Whereas in a village, while everybody does benefit from each other, it's not top down. There's no one guy in the village usually that has all the power that can just unilaterally dictate what people do. I mean, a good example from myth and legend is Agamemnon in the Trojan War, right? He assembles all the kings of Greece. He says, "You got to help my brother, Menelaus, get his wife Helen back." But he can't just unilaterally dictate to all these men. He has to sell them the idea of the war. Part of it's the plunder and the loot. Part of it's the injustice of Trojans stealing. If Paris steals Menelaus' wife, what can anybody do to your wives, right? So, but he has to make a case because the level of dependency is at a lower level and more equal. You can then relate to each other and depend on each other in a way that's less predatory than, say, a directly top-down government or corporate structure. And so so let's go back to the question at hand. The question is the family, right? The first question we have to ask is, what was family life like before the Industrial Revolution? What institutions were in place economically to ensure that family formation and all the things that went into it, having children, raising children, setting them up for the next generation, worked? That's number one. Number two, we then say, okay, given our current situation, how do we reproduce that? And that's going to be necessarily an off-the-grid economic system, because we're going to have to create an economic system with different incentives that are pro-family, pro-natal incentives rather than what we have now. And that's going to be a lot of hard work. And most people don't want to do that, at least yet. I predict that whether they want to or not, they'll have to, as we have collapse going from a high energy state to a low energy state, capital degradation. This will just have to happen or you'll die. And not everybody's going to die. And those that don't die are going to be those that figure this out. It's just that simple. And so how do we, the way we build parallel structures, and of course, a lot of people mention law. Well, I mean, we know how to do that too. Why don't Christians do what the Religion of Peace does, right? In England, they're like, no, these are our laws. England's laws don't affect us. We're going to have our own Islamic courts. Well, start doing that, because apparently there's a precedent for it now. And now all of a sudden about, divorce, rape, and all this other stuff becomes moot because you are now a self-contained legal system. And you create, now again, that whole, basically the wobbly strategy, building the new world in the shell of the old, is going to be a massive undertaking, no doubt about it. But we have to look at this, clearly. And then to somebody who's not a TradCon, not interested in the family, it's like, look, you either build this raft or you drown. Like it's not even a matter of, convincing you ideologically. Do you want to literally survive? Because there was a great discussion in the late 90s between Lee Kuan Yew and Fareed Zakaria. And he said the one thing that survives the rise and fall of civilizations is the family, which is why Asian societies have pro-family laws, unlike you in America. Because that's the only thing that survived. Well, maybe religious institutions, like we saw with the Catholic Church in the Dark Ages. You're not going to survive a collapsing system without the family. So it's just simple as Logos.
Yeah, jumping off this point, if we're going to look at why people don't build parallel institutions currently, from my experience dealing with local politics especially, the problem seems to be that there's too much of an interconnected dependence on the rest of the economy. So people want a certain standard of living. Doesn't matter who you are. If you're trad, libertarian, far left, whoever you are, talk is cheap, but there seems to be a certain amount of living you take for granted and a certain standard of living below which you're not willing to accept for anything. Now, here's the problem. Becoming dependent only on your local community, by definition, is going to mean curtailing highly your dependence on the rest of the international economy. So the favorite food you eat at the store, depending on the vast trucking networks in the country, depending on being made in factories in other countries, and so forth. Everything from the food you eat, the clothes you buy, all of it is dependent on this hyper competitive, complicated supply chain of stuff all going on all over the world. And the more you're dependent on that supply chain, the more you're dependent on the edicts of, like you point out, the international corporations and so on. They control the trade, they control the stuff you want and take for granted, and that's how they have you. So people don't seem to understand how radical a notion it is to build a parallel society that would be free from that influence. You really have to build a society that can make its own clothes, for example, that can farm its own food, that can make its own education institutions and teach its own people. And you want to find a way to give something to the other economy, because that's a way you can get wealthy. But you can't be dependent on bringing stuff in from the rest of the world's economy. You have to be willing. You have to have a trade surplus, basically. That's the short of it. If you don't have a trade surplus, you have a trade deficit, and there's no such thing as a free lunch. Trade deficits will always cost you something. And until people realize that, you're just not going to build parallel institutions. So it seems to me that if this is the way we want to go with this, then what you have to do is help prepare people to figure out how to decouple themselves from the global economy. And that first step seems to be the hardest one. Everything else seems to be an abstraction if you can't get that figured out.
Yeah. I mean, it took me a long time to connect all the dots on this. Because it's like, well, how on the one hand can everybody be saying they want to do X, but then never do it, right? That's what AA talks about with the declared versus revealed preferences. Well, what determines the revealed preference? One's dependency on the global economic order. That is what determines your revealed preference, right? The more dependent you are, your revealed preference diverges far more from your stated preference. For example, if you're not dependent at all, like say the Afghans that were fighting America for 20 years, there was a total alignment between their stated preference and revealed preference because they weren't dependent at all on the modern economic order. Same for Hezbollah and Lebanon. So no, again, I'm not saying, stockpile an armory and get Waco'd. That's not going to work. But the thing is, though, look, nobody Waco'd the Hutterites. Nobody Waco'd the Amish. Nobody Waco'd the Burderhoff. This can be done. Okay. You just don't go around, stockpiling a private army. Okay. That's the lesson of Waco. Again, nobody, even though the feds definitely messed around with the Amish, the raw milk stuff, they never did that kind of an attack because it wasn't something they could justify, right? The quote unquote threat threshold was so low that they could never justify that to the public of a raid like that on the Amish. But then the other thing that is the cost in living. Yeah, that's the reduction in the standard of living is the real issue here. Because so many people, well, let's back it up first. There was a lot of discussion in that stream about, the harsh realities. Okay, the harsh realities is if the trends hold and there's no change at all, we're going to end up with, I can't think of it now, but we're going to end up with men having sex dolls, women having lithium-powered dildos, and never the twain shall meet because of legal and economic reasons. And then we're all going to die and get taken over by Mexico or China. That's the end goal of this process. And as long as you're allied to that process, that's what you're going to end up with. That's it. And the only way out is to rebuild the family to survive the crisis that's coming, as Lee Kuan Yew said. It's really stark and it's really simple. If we stay on this course, we're going to end up radically depopulated and probably taken over by some foreign country. Or we rebuild the family and have local communities again, which are able to be self-sustaining more or less indefinitely, as we used to have until globalism hollowed everything out. I mean, that's the brass tacks of it, and there's no getting around that. So the third point I wanted to bring up was men and women radically need to change their views on literally everything, not just how they relate to each other, which of course was the topic of that video, how they relate economically, how they relate to the state, how they relate to the world, how they relate to the environment itself. Because if you're gonna live there for 1,000 years, as Derek Jensen's fond of saying, you're going to act very differently than if you're just going to be there for 5 years. And so how you treat where you live, you don't shit where you eat, right? That's the saying. But if you don't plan on living there, or if you don't plan on the next generation living there, then you're going to treat that land a lot different than if you plan on living there for 1,000 years. And so a radical rethinking, a kind of Descartes moment where we just rethink everything, because you're going to have to. And getting people, that's actually the point you have to get to before you build the local economy, because you have to get people to rethink everything. And that seems to be where we're really getting stuck. Nobody wants to rethink everything.
Well, yeah. I mean, nobody wants to rethink everything because too much of life as they know it depends on certain conventional wisdom, so to speak, and too many assumptions on standards of living and so on. Like, you can't get people to rethink everything without rethinking everything about their life as they know it. It's like asking them to jump off a cliff into an abyss with nothing to catch them. I mean, at least if you're Kierkegaard, God will catch you if you take the leap of faith. We can't even promise people that much, because I don't know about you. I don't know that there's some sort of prophecy or mandate or anything for this local part of this issue we're going through. Maybe Jesus comes 100 years from now. Maybe he comes 1,000 years from now. So whatever leap of faith people take, who knows what's waiting on the other side for them. And that's the true issue. I mean, if they don't do it, it's terrible. So it's like you're standing on top of a cliff and a bunch of hyenas are coming to devour you, and the only thing you can do is jump down into an abyss. It's like, well, maybe you have to jump, but you want to stay up there as long as you can if you can help it. Like, I don't see any other way out for people.
Well, yeah, I mean, under optimal conditions, right? What you would have is, in the time that's allotted before, we really accelerate to a crisis point, forward-thinking people would have already started building the infrastructure necessary to soak up people that want to survive and build these new institutions, and then grow that, as society withers away. That might actually be happening, but as far as I can tell, I haven't seen any evidence that it is. Presumably because people who are doing that wouldn't rise to national prominence, or even, the state news. But now, you mentioned, of course, Logos, that there's a lot of conventions. But here's the thing. Most people aren't existing in life. They're terminally online. So why not rethink everything?
Well, I mean, I'm existing online, but at least I'm existing. So, like, if I rethink everything, I've got no community. I've got nowhere to go. I don't have any backup plan for my paycheck and whatever the system is. So yeah, I mean, I can agree with you that what I and a lot of people are doing now is barely living, but we're living. And so we don't really have a plan as individuals for that. That's the problem. A lot of us terminally online people could probably get together and build something, but we're spread out all over the country. And so there's no real, like, here, let's just get a plot of land and do something with it, like project to do. So it's not like terminally online or rethink something and take this plot of land and start, making something of it. It's terminally online or what's the replacement?
Right. This is kind of where this is highly speculative, but if any boomer wants to enter into the boomer salvation arc, the boomer salvation arc is before they die, they buy up property and move all of us terminally online people there to start over. That's, waiting for the boomer salvation arc. Logos. Maybe that's it.
I guess, but that now we've kind of circled back to the original questions I brought up, right? Because in order for there to be a boomer savior arc, you have to convince boomers to save you. And so far as I've seen, the boomers that are even in this space to begin with having these conversations are all the libertarians that think like every individual is an island, and if we just follow our rational self-interests, we're all going to be just fine. So how do you convince those people?
I mean, that's a very good question. And no, again, with tonight's episode, and then of course what I had intended to discuss last week was obviously I was under no illusions that in the next even 5 years we could just start up this new community. if we look at any sort of radically new idea, right? So we could look at, say, for example, when we look at, say, the Spanish Civil War and see the rise of Spanish anarchism, which was the largest expression of anarchism anywhere in the world outside of Russia, it looks like it comes out of nowhere, right? But for the average observer, right? But there was a lot of, like, I think Chomsky mentioned something like 50 years building up to this. No, I don't know the details to all that, right? But also that's see, we're at the sort of like pre phase where it's like, in order to have an actual like movement come onto the historical scene like that, you need to have a sufficient groundswell of people that are interested. So you need the idea guys to get the ideas out. And then you need a lot of people that are like, hey, we're disaffected. I like those ideas. And they have like practical trade skills, whatever, practical skills, right? And or money or whatever. And then the idea guys, keep on pumping out the ideas. And then the practical people come together and it's like, okay, we agree enough on these things to actually pull this off. So I'd say that where we're at, Logos, is the idea stage. Where the terminally online people come in, like you and I, is we come up with the ideas. And hopefully using the online platforms, we can then get those ideas out to enough people or to the right people. Because really all it takes is just the right people, right? It's the right wealthy boomer, right? It's the right people that can come in, but you won't know who they are until you cast a wide net with your ideas.
I guess that's true.
Because here's the real issue, right? No, I agree with you, right? The in these circles, generally speaking, the boomers are going to be, libertarian leaning, and they're going to have all those hangups we just mentioned. But here's one thing, though, right, that we have to keep in mind. Where you and I are placing this discussion, nobody else is here yet. And furthermore, 5 years ago, I wasn't here yet. So really, this is like the cutting edge of the new idea coming out. So really, I feel like looking at the past, we could just as easily chalk this up as that nobody really knew what you had to do.
That's certainly an optimistic way of looking at it.
Well, it's optimistic, but to be honest, though, one of the things you mentioned, nobody's going to jump off a cliff if they don't know where they're going to land. And it's one thing to say, hey, we need parallel institutions. Now, I have been saying that for a while,
right?
But it's another thing to say, okay, let's look at history. What did these things actually look like before industrial civilization? And then you have something tangible to engage with. Because I was still only speaking of this even 5 years ago in an abstracted sense. But like, what does it actually look like? So, for example, let me give you a totally different analogy. In the study of military history, there's a saying that amateurs study tactics, professionals study logistics. Because an army that doesn't have fuel for its tanks or trucks and ammo for its weapons or food for its troops won't go anywhere. A lot of people in the dissident space are amateurs, right? They're talking about the tactics. They're not talking about the logistics. Now, there's a lot of really smart people in this sector. I think one of the things that could change if we could pull this off, which is move the locus of the conversation from the amateur tactics to the expert logistics, and get enough of these highly intelligent guys to think about that problem, and I think we could solve it.
Okay. We'll let the audience make up their minds about how that's going to go and see if there's any more ideas that can be generated, I guess.
Well, you call it optimistic, Logos, but I also just call it necessity, because either you rebuild this or you die. So there's only really one shot we have here. We either rebuild what we lost or we all die. And so if you attempt to rebuild it and fail, well, your outcome is no different than if you didn't do anything at all.
That's true. But I guess
but if it comes off, then you get saved. Go ahead.
Yeah. I guess this leads to another topic, which is the other interesting place I hope the stream would go but didn't. I guess there was 3 things that you could look at this from. And this would be the third one. I guess it's apropos to bring it up now. So let's suppose we get this thing off the ground. You get this parallel institution. We have control. whether it's a parallel community, or Sargon even made that rant about how people at the top changed these things for the worse, right? It's kind of a based rant. We talked about that a little bit after the stream. We just thought it was kind of interesting that it was like people at the top have kind of like engineered society to have these maladaptive views, but the idea that people can take it over at the top and kind of realign the views was kind of off the table. It's like, nah, we just all need to be individuals. It's like, well, you didn't lose as individuals. You lost because the top of society and all its institutions got co-opted anyway. Whether people take over society again, as maybe the conventional right wants to do, the Turning Point USAs of the world and all that stuff, want to do their own long march to the institutions, get their own people graduating college and so forth. Whether they win or whether we set up a parallel institution, whatever it may be, the last line of questions we need to ask, I think, are what policies would we enact with these dynamics to keep this mistake from happening again?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'm not really interested at the national level. I don't think well, more to the point, it's not that I think that they'll fail to achieve a national control, which, I mean, I do, but that's not my main objection. There won't be a national to control. I feel like we're gonna so far degrade that just will be a moot question for everybody. Well, what you do is, this is something we talked about briefly privately before, Logos. A lot of these traditional societies, communities that existed throughout Europe and North America even, they got targeted by these corporations and transnationals and progressives in the government. And it was a divide and conquer strategy. They were all very parochial. So it's like, you're just one small town in the American South, and you're painted as like reactionaries and bigots and idiots, and the whole country gets one giant laugh at your expense, like Dayton, Tennessee, right, 1925. And you're just, it's over, right? It's just over for you. What you have to do is you have to get people who are doing these things to realize, not only in the community sense that you can't make it alone, there's going to have to be some sort of understanding that other communities as well, which may not be your community, are at least allied to you in the sense that you want the same thing, a kind of independent, self-subsisting existence. And that if you were to be, like, say, pressured by, well, let's say Dayton, Tennessee, let's say the press comes in and wants to make a fool of you, all the other communities like, well, hold up, we're going to pool our resources to match the hoity-toity New York, press, and then fight back on the idea front.
That's part of it. So the other thing I'm concerned about is the idea that even if you fix this and society crumbles, it's just going to start all over again. Because what's going to happen is people are going to forget the lessons of the past. They're going to forget, why this happened. The technology switch is going to flip back on. All the social rules are just going to look back on as just dumb, sexist, patriarchal, all the usual stuff. Because after the technology switch flips on, people with current technology look back on pre-technology past as just a bunch of dumb people that oppressed each other for no reason. And so the cycle begins again. So I think what we really need to do is figure out some ways to have charters, laws, whatever in your community that make it so they can't forget why we're going through this. And, well, it's also a paradox too, because if you keep the technology switch flipped off, then you're very, very easy prey for those with technology. And the only strategy I think we've come up with is something like keep the media on your side, or something like Afghanistan or another country did. We fought with like hands behind our back and say Vietnam or Afghanistan in a lot of ways. Some ways we didn't, because we didn't want the media reporting on the bloodbaths we could have brought about. So I mean that's one way we could do it. But I mean, if the media is not kind to you and you're technologically outgunned and so on, like you brought on with that Dayton, Tennessee thing. How do you keep communities from just kind of like giving in and restarting the whole system?
Well, partly I think that if we watch the logic of the crisis that we're living through play out, it's going to be a collapse. And I just, okay, first of all, it's only because of technology that we've been able to indulge in these very non-standard ways of thinking. And I think most charitably, it would be hundreds, if not thousands of years later that any sort of technology like this comes back, because the infrastructure, the resources are all gone. Given the nature of energy, how we had cheap energy 200 years ago with oil, I have doubts it can ever come back. Whether it does or not, it'll be after our lifetimes. So I guess as a possible contingency that may be unlikely but could still happen, what do we do? Well, I mean, the thing that we used to do, we used to tell these stories about what happened, and they're sort of turned into morality tales, like, oh, don't do what that guy did because you'll end up like him. And we used to do it all the time growing up, but when we had the illusions of technology over the last 200 years, and people were getting, quote unquote, getting away with, breaking the moral code, yeah, I mean, it really eroded all of that. And so we're always one generation away from a collapse, right? One generation can screw up so badly that everything before is just wiped out. And that's the perennial problem of existence.
Yeah, that's true. I guess the one thing I'll close on is that I don't think technology has to get all that bad before things start getting corrupted, right? You can go back to Roman times, the Silk Road, China, Sparta, trade resources and all that stuff. Like you can live overly well lifestyles even back then with limited technology, and that kind of greed can still bring a community under. So the problem seems a little more perennial than, say, cheap oil.
Fair
But
enough.
otherwise, I agree. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have one super chat. Sabine Wren for five English pounds. Thank you. As an English person, Sharia acceptance in UK made me think, why not create an alt-right religious group, Christian or anything else? It's obvious. Yeah, I know it's obvious. I don't know why no one's doing this. So, all right, let's engage with the chat a little bit here. We have a really nice turnout. Everybody, thanks for showing up. Let's see real quick. Okay, back to the top. Let's see. Lord Akabusi. Current trad position seems to ignore. Oh, this is just so good. We got to share this. Current trad position seems to ignore hyperreality and embrace wholesome Chungus Tolkienism. Well, I wish. We're not really there yet. Let's see here. A lot of people in the chat. Wrote in, it's not technology, it's legal and ideological apparatus. Well, as Logos and as I'm proposed to Logos, there's a feedback loop of many things. I still think technology is fundamental, but there are, yes, legal, economic, and social as well. Doubting Thomas. Younger generations have absolutely no stability to raise a family. Divorce can destroy the family. No job is ever really secure. Ill immigration may make the original hometown unlivable over time. Yeah, that's a big part of it. What Toffler called future shock. We're not really meant to be dealing with that. I feel like, let's see, Nicholas 3000. I feel like much of the dissident right just wants to talk and never address the actual issue. We have a winner. Yes. Okay, let's see here. Okay. So let's see. What do we got here? Doubting Thomas. The Ukrainians are currently fighting the GAE's war. The problem for the GAE will be manifest when we have to use our own troops. I agree. I don't think you have anything to add to that, do you, Logos?
I'm sorry, I missed that a little bit. What's that? What's the GAE?
The Global American Empire.
Oh, okay. Say that again now that I understand what GAE means.
The Ukrainians are currently fighting the GAE's war. The problems for the GAE will really be manifest when we have to use our own troops. From Doubting Thomas.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Sabine Wren 21 asks, What was the documentary called about Sparta that Logos referred to?
Yeah, I saw that earlier, but I was trying to keep up with the stream. Let me see if I can find it again. It was just a random recommendation on my YouTube. It was like animated. It was kind of interesting.
All right, Logos is looking it up, guys. You'll probably put it in the chat then, right, Logos?
Sure.
Okay, what else?
And I'm not a history buff. I don't know if this thing's like super legit or whatever. But oh, there it is. Look at that. Found it.
Okay. Markin Karakowiski. That's at least assuring, but it was all three of them against Todd. So I don't know who he's referring to. It kind of felt like that sometime, but okay.
Was it? Yeah, it was AA Sargon and
Red Hawk.
Red Hawk. Yeah.
Charlemagne. I'm glad to see you here, Charlemagne. Let's see. Okay, talk about the cold. We can skip that. Yeah. Camelot Chimp at F. Jabaki. I think the issue was none of the other three wanted to move the discussion in a more political direction. Yeah, I mean, true. That's true. Road in the Amish already do this. Yeah, exactly. This is not hard. You're not going to get Waco. The Amish are already doing this. Just don't go around running a cult trying to start the doomsday. But you know, the Amish have hundreds of years of head start over us. Well, okay, to that point, Logos, the first thing we'd have to do is we would have to send people to visit in real life communities already doing this and then take notes and be like, okay, well, how are you doing this? How are you doing this? And then formulate a plan that way. Because again, it's still all theory selling right now.
Yeah.
But you could. The Hutterites do this. The Mormons do it even. Now they're a little more integrated, but they still have their own, control over communities. Part of it is you'll have to be preppers. I mean, if everybody's a prepper, that works. The problem with preppers in general is they're individualistic and don't work together.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting because the people who have the temperament for the thing we're trying to pull off is usually people on the left. They're the ones that are always talking about forming like eco-villages and setting up these communities and stuff. I mean, libertarians to a degree also started like the was that New Hampshire or wherever they did that, the Free State Project. Yeah. They did that one thing, but I see like leftists like all over South America, Mexico, different parts of the U.S. starting these like eco-villages and eco-communities. So, I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's like a based part of the left that you could tap into that, gets into all this stuff. It's also would be interesting to study those villages and see like how many of the leftist social politics actually scale once you start these eco villages and abandon this technology and so on and so forth. That's another thing that'd be fun to take notes on because we have a hypothesis, right? Technology is a cause of a lot of these problems. Well, are we right? Do these leftist societies still have some of these hangups that, you disagree with, even with these minimalistic levels of technology?
Yeah, well, one of the problems is within America, especially in the 60s and 70s, a lot of these societies were started and then imploded.
Yeah, that's true.
So
you have to look at ones that have succeeded for a while.
There's not that many, but there are some. Well, I've been saying this for a while now. When it comes to, we'll call it the raft, when we're building this raft, we're going to have to give up any sort of preconceived notions of who's going to come to be a part of our group. Because I feel like at this point, peak hyper reality could literally be anybody. And we need to be open to that possibility.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of people who would identify as left wing who, say I got left behind. The Democrats to the left me behind. Well, I mean, again, this is the mistake that we saw with the mid-20th century Germans, right? A lot of these Russians hated communism. But instead of like recruiting them into the army, they got shot, they got persecuted, so that they didn't jump ship from the Soviets. Whereas, if we, these people that got left behind, if we don't give them an alternative, at least, assuming they're in good faith, we don't know until we give them the alternative. There's a risk that at worst they join the collective again, or I guess at best they just kind of sit by themselves and die. And then the skills that they have don't come over to us. which that's still not a great case. Let's see. What else? Just some more here. See, we're nearing the end here. I'm just seeing if there's anything relevant to our discussion tonight. Wandering Panda, hope for the coming of Christ, live as if he isn't coming. Well, now, back to the TradCon question, right? How do we get people to do this? From if we're narrowing this question down to just Christians, right? Well, it's simple. Just man up and start living like Jesus would. We all know what Jesus said to do. Most Christians just choose to pick and choose which parts of Jesus they want to keep. Now, again, we can't really expect that within the Christian conception of the world until there's a kind of like spirit of revival, which I don't see that anywhere right now. But, that has happened throughout history in the past. However you want to explain that, whether it's the Holy Spirit or historical circumstance. But there could be a point at which that happens. And so people are like, all right, it's time to put our faith into practice for real, and then move on. Again, that hasn't happened yet, but right, it's more to the point that what I'm trying to do, and I think what you're trying to do, Logos, is if this kind of work isn't done, if the opportunity were to manifest, we'd miss it.
Exactly. Yeah, I see a window coming in pretty quick. And it's about getting as many people on board as quickly as possible and start a transition before the window's gone.
Yeah. I mean, and if it's not done by those of us who can do it, it won't be done at all, and then it's game over. Minoan, terminally online. I didn't get the internet at home until 2011, and I didn't discover social media until 2017. I've made up for the time since. That's funny. Well, it looks like there really isn't much more to engage with here. So yeah, is there anything you want to say before we wrap this up, Logos?
I don't think so. I think we beat it to death today.
Oh, we got another super chat. Hold on. Don't want to miss it. K. Lewis for $2. Thanks. Should a Christian seek profit from stocks? Well, given the nature of this discussion, people who are invested in the stock market are not invested in their local community. So I would say no.
I think it depends. I mean, I can't answer like as a Christian, like theologically, like you'd have to answer that question as far as like money and whatnot. But it depends. Like if you're looking in the stock market for a long-term investment, I don't know. Like it's been good for a while, but I think the global order is about to flip pretty soon, and things are going to get really bad. So maybe pragmatically don't. However, in the short term, if there's like a GameStop situation where you can do like a Wall Street bets thing, and you just like know that you got like investment capital over a barrel, you can get some quick money or something. I guess that'd be a question. So let's suppose you could extract some quick money like the GameStop people did, and then use that money to help fund something like this. From a Christian perspective, would that be an ethical venture?
Right. There's a lot to think about there. I suppose part of it depends on what the nature of the venture and other things. I'm not really prepared to give an answer at the moment.
Maybe another casual stream.
Probably. Okay, this is what we'll wrap it up with. Minoan, thanks. Todd, Merry Christmas to you. Have a nice week off. And everybody else, it's Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.